Well, John E. Herbst is a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. John, thanks for joining us. What do you make of these reports coming out about Trump and Zelensky's latest meeting on Friday? When you hear things like Russia keeping the land that it currently has might be what Trump is thinking, what does that make you think?
Well, Trump's been pretty clear since before he even entered the Oval Office for a second time that he thinks that there needs to be an immediate end to the shooting and that there would be some sort of ceasefire along the current lines held by both sides. So there's nothing new in that. What would be new is if the reports are accurate that Trump was urging Zelensky to give up all the Donbass. But we just saw Trump deny that publicly. And my understanding is that it may not have been Trump who discussed that possibility, but someone else on the American team. And not even as a suggestion, but just this is saying something to the effect that this is what Putin would like.
Indeed. And it does seem, as our Fraser Jackson was saying a few moments ago, that Trump seemed to be parroting some talking points from Russia. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, the point is we don't know. I was not in the room and I've not heard a recording of the conversation. But we do know that sometimes when Trump speaks with one interlocutor, he takes those ideas into his meeting with his next interlocutor. So that would not be surprising. The only real question is, would Trump be advocating the position, that he heard from Putin? And at this point, I'm not certain that's what happened.
There is an upcoming meeting planned between Trump and Putin. Talk to us a bit more about the consequences of that meeting and perhaps any possible repercussions we might see in Ukraine from that.
Well, I think it's highly unlikely that Putin will offer any real compromise. He wants to continue the war. He doesn't want American sanctions on additional American sanctions on Russia. He doesn't want the United States to send advanced weapons like Tomahawks to Ukraine. That explains the Putin phone call to Trump last week, because Russia was getting very nervous that the United States might provide Tomahawks to Ukraine. The mere fact that they spoke, that Putin suggested this meeting in Budapest, was enough to persuade Trump not to proceed to give Tomahawks to Ukraine. From my point of view, that was a mistake. The only way you're going to get Putin to negotiate seriously, to agree to an actual end to the war, is to put pressure on Russia. That pressure comes from sanctions. It comes from weapons, American weapons to Ukraine.
So if that's the case, why wouldn't Donald Trump be pursuing that strategy at the moment?
Well, he seems to be of two minds. He's been talking since May of putting major new pressure on Moscow because it's very clear that Zelensky says yes to Trump's proposals for peace. Putin says no. But then when Putin offers a meeting to maybe figure things out, Trump seems to go along. That happened in May when Trump and his European colleagues were threatening sanctions. It happened in August, and now it seems to be happening again in October. That is not the way to bring Putin to peace. Trump may understand that, but at this point, he's not willing to put the heavy pressure necessary to push Putin towards peace.
John, you know Ukraine well. You were U.S. ambassador there for 3 years. It is a very complex situation in Ukraine. It's a complex country. What do you think, looking forward, would be the best course of action for Ukraine at this point?
Well, for Ukraine, the best thing would be if the United States and its partners gave Ukraine everything it needed to push Russian forces substantially, if not entirely, out of Ukraine. Trump's not going to do that, and I'm not sure the Europeans want to do that. But Trump's original idea of achieving a durable peace along the current lines would be an adequate outcome for Ukraine, because this would ensure their future as an independent, sovereign, and secure state. But we've yet to see the necessary pressure on the Kremlin, which wants to have political control of Ukraine. And only if Putin's persuaded that the costs of war are too high will he stop the shooting. Trump may understand that. He said after his meeting with Zelensky that perhaps Russia is playing him. He's been played before he comes out on top. If that's true, we will see serious pressure from the Trump administration on Russia at some point. But at this stage, it does not seem to be happening in the next week or two.
And you mentioned there briefly the role of the Europeans in all of this. Do you think that Europe has any interest at this point in getting more involved in helping Ukraine in this conflict, truly?
Well, I think Europe has stood up over the past 6 or 7 months as the United States decided to end its gifts to Ukraine. Europe understands that if Putin were to actually succeed in Ukraine, take control over most of the country, their own security would be seriously weakened. Therefore, it's extremely important for Europe that Ukraine remains an independent country, a secure country.
Indeed, but to what lengths is it ready to go to ensure that that continues?
Well, one, they're increasing their assistance to Ukraine as the United States is no longer providing aid as opposed to sale of weapons. Two, they are looking at seriously at in some fashion taking control of the frozen Russian state assets and letting those assets go in some fashion to Ukraine. And three, we see increased European arms production. There are arms agreements between Ukraine and several European countries. That number of countries will grow. And Europeans are also talking about putting troops on the ground in Ukraine. So I think Europe is actually stepping up. I think Macron is part of this, Starmer, Merz, and of course the Poles and the Baltic states.
John, thank you for that. John Herbst, a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and senior
A
director of
pleasure.
the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Thank you so much.